My wife cheated on me with my best friend. For 2 years, I used to trust two people more than anyone else in this world. My wife and my best friend. For 2 whole years, they looked me straight in the eye, sat across the dinner table from me, laughed with me, celebrated my birthdays, raised a glass with me on New Year's Eve, all while quietly betraying me behind my back. If you asked me what hurt the most, I wouldn't say it was the moment I read the first messages. It wasn't even the moment I saw Jake's car parked outside my house on a rainy night. And it definitely wasn't the moment I played that video in front of everyone. The part that hurt the most was realizing that, for a very long stretch of time, I had been living inside a fake marriage without ever knowing it. My name is Daniel. I'm 34 years old. I live in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, in a 2-story house with a white fence out front, an old maple tree by the porch, and a mailbox Emily once said looked cute, like something out of a Hallmark movie. I work as an accountant for a logistics company. It's an ordinary job, an ordinary life, and for a long time, everything felt so ordinary that I mistook that ordinariness for a kind of lasting happiness. I truly believed that, until there was nothing left. The life I thought I had from the outside. My life was the kind of life people call stable. Not glamorous, not especially wealthy, but good, solid, respectable. Emily and I met 8 years ago in a small bookstore in German Village. I know it sounds a little cliché, but it's true. It was cold that day, that raw late November Ohio kind of cold, with the wind whipping through the old brick streets. I stepped into the bookstore to get out of the cold and look for a personal finance book I can't even remember the name of now. Emily was standing in the fiction section, wearing a cream-colored sweater, her hair half pulled back, 3 books in her arms, frowning like she was trying to solve some impossible little mystery. One of the books slipped from her hand. I bent down and picked it up. She smiled at me. I still remember what that felt like. Not like lightning, not like some dramatic movie moment. It was quieter than that, softer, more like the feeling of finally stepping into a warm room after a long, cold day. Emily wasn't the kind of woman who demanded attention by being loud. She had a different kind of gravity. She made people want to stay near her. She knew how to listen. She remembered the smallest things. She knew how to make coffee exactly the way someone liked it. She knew when to make a joke and when to just sit beside you in silence. I didn't fall in love with her because of the big moments. I fell in love with her because of the small ones that repeated themselves until they became part of my everyday life. The way she pulled the blanket over me when I fell asleep on the couch. The way she left vitamins on the kitchen counter when I got sick. The way she always texted, "Drive safe asterisk," whenever I had to leave town for work. 3 years after we met, I proposed to her by the lake in Chicago during a weekend trip. Emily cried. I cried too. We called both our families that same night. And in that moment, I honestly believed I was one of the luckiest men in America. And Jake was the other part of what I used to call family. I met Jake my freshman year at Ohio State. The day we met, we almost got into a fight over a seat in some cheap bar near the dorms. Instead, we ended up drinking together until 2 in the morning. We were close from that night on. Jake was the kind of guy people liked instantly. Tall, confident, smooth-talking. Always ready with the exact story that would make an entire table burst out laughing. If I was careful, reserved, a little introverted, Jake was the kind of man who walked into a room and made it brighter without even trying. We went through a lot together. Failed exams, breakups, first jobs, those nights sitting on the floor eating cold pizza at 2 in the morning, talking about the future like it was guaranteed to be beautiful. Jake was my best man at my wedding. I still remember that day with painful clarity. Emily stood at the end of the aisle in the church, wearing white, with sunlight pouring through the stained glass windows. I stood beside Jake at the altar. I remember glancing over at him and seeing him nod at me as if to say, "You made it, man. This is the life you always wanted." And I believed him. I really did. 6 years after the wedding, our life was filled with things that were so American, so ordinary, so easy to trust. Saturday mornings at Costco, Sunday afternoons watching football, early fall weekends cleaning up the yard, piling yellow leaves into heaps. Thanksgiving at Emily's parents' place in Cincinnati. Christmas lights around the porch, with Emily laughing because I always managed to tangle the string. Summer evenings grilling burgers in the backyard with soft country music in the background, and the sound of a neighbor mowing his lawn somewhere next door. Emily worked for a mid-sized event planning company. Her schedule was more flexible than mine, though sometimes she stayed out late because of weddings, conferences, or charity events. My life moved on a steady 9-to-5 rhythm, except during busy seasons when I'd come home later than usual. We didn't have kids, at least not yet. People asked sometimes. Emily always smiled and said, maybe soon. I'd smile too. Some nights we lay in bed talking about how, when we finally had kids, we'd move to a bigger house, closer to a better school, with a yard big enough for a dog to run around in. Emily had even saved baby room paint ideas on Pinterest. A life like that, from the outside, it looked solid. I thought so too. That's what made the falls so brutal later. Not because I had doubts and stubbornly ignored them, but because I truly had no doubts at all. Asterisk 2. The first cracks are always small asterisk. If betrayal arrived like thunder across a clear sky, maybe I would have noticed sooner. But it never comes like that. It comes in tiny things, so small that every single time, you can explain them away. Emily started using her phone more. Not in some glaring, obvious way. Not like she was glued to it all day. It was subtler than that. She'd smile at it more often. She'd turn the screen face down when I walked by. She started bringing it into the bathroom with her. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Everyone has a phone. Everyone texts. And I wasn't the kind of husband who policed things like that. Jake still came by the house all the time. Sometimes to watch basketball. Sometimes with a new craft beer he wanted me to try. Sometimes just because he didn't feel like eating dinner alone. He worked in medical device sales, so his schedule was unpredictable, but somehow he always seemed able to make time to stop by my house. And honestly, I found that comforting. Your wife and your best friend getting along. That's supposed to be a good thing, right? That's what I thought back then. There were nights when I went upstairs early because I had to be up the next morning. Emily and Jake would still be downstairs in the living room talking, their laughter drifting up softly through the floorboard. I'd lie in bed half awake, listening to glasses clink, the TV murmur in the background, and Emily laugh in that warm, easy way I loved most. Back then, that sound didn't make me uneasy. It made me feel safe. I remember thinking I'm lucky. The woman I love and the man I trust most in the world genuinely care about each other. Now when I look back on that feeling, I see how innocent it was. Innocent to the point of cruelty. One time, near the end of summer, I came into the kitchen earlier than usual because a meeting at work had been canceled. I still remember the smell of tomato sauce and toasted bread in the air. Emily was standing by the bar counter. Jake was leaning against the refrigerator. The second I walked in, they both went silent, just for a beat, very short. Then Emily turned to me with a perfectly normal smile. "You're home early." Jake lifted his can of soda. "Meeting canceled." I nodded and didn't think much of it. But now, when I replay that moment in my head, I can feel the broken shape of the air in that kitchen. Something I had interrupted, a sentence cut off, a distance they hadn't yet had time to correct. But at the time, I filled every blank space with trust. Trust is beautiful when it's given to the right people. When it's given to the wrong ones, it turns you blind. Asterisk 3. Love doesn't disappear all at once. It wears down little by little. Asterisk. About a year later, I started to feel that something wasn't right. Not I have proof asterisk wrong. More like that strange feeling of standing inside your own house and sensing that everything has shifted half an inch out of place. Not enough to point at, not enough to name, but enough to make you restless. Emily still cooked, still asked if I was tired after work, still kissed me before leaving the house. But there was something in her that felt farther away. She was right in front of me, and yet her mind always seemed to be somewhere else. I remember noticing it one Wednesday evening. I had just stepped out of my home office and found Emily sitting at the dining table, her laptop open. But her eyes were fixed on the window instead of the screen. The kitchen was warm with yellow light. The wall clock ticked. Outside, the sprinklers had just come on. I stood there for a few seconds watching her. "You okay?" Emily turned, startled, like she had just been pulled back from somewhere far away. Yeah, I'm fine. You seem, I don't know, tired." She smiled, that same gentle smile, just enough to make someone stop asking questions. "I'm just tired. Work's been a lot." I nodded. I believed her, partly because I loved her, and partly because when you love someone, you will almost always choose the explanation that hurts the least. After that, the distance between us didn't come from huge fights. It came from the disappearance of things that had once felt natural. Emily stopped reaching for my arm at the grocery store, stopped curling up against me on the couch during movies, stopped telling me random little stories from work with the same bright, effortless energy she used to have. Our marriage changed too. I don't talk about that part easily, even now. But the truth is, when the person you love starts touching you like they're fulfilling a duty rather than reaching for you because they want to, you can feel the difference. I felt it, but instead of blaming her, I blamed myself. Maybe I had become too boring. Maybe I worked too much. Maybe I wasn't romantic anymore. I booked dinner reservations at Emily's favorite restaurant. I bought flowers. I suggested weekend getaways. Emily always said yes, always smiled, always thanked me, but the space between us still felt like it was covered in glass. One night at dinner, I joked that lately she had been as cold as the CFO at my company. Emily laughed, but her eyes didn't really meet mine. You turn everything into schedules and numbers. It wasn't cruel, but it stayed with me. I thought maybe she was right. I thought maybe I was the problem. That's one of the cruelest things about a long affair. The betrayed person doesn't just lose trust in someone else. He slowly loses trust in his own ability to read reality. Asterisk 4, the night everything shifted completely out of place. There is one night I still remember so clearly, it feels like my mind preserved it just to torture me later. Jake came over like usual. It was a Sunday night. There was a big game on. I had bought wings. Emily made homemade ranch, and Jake brought a six-pack of IPA. We were all sitting in the living room with the announcers talking from the TV, warm lamplight in the corner, and the smell of butter and pepper hanging in the air. It was such a normal scene that there was nothing suspicious about it. Halfway through the second quarter, my work phone rang. There was a numbers issue that needed my approval for first thing Monday morning. I stood up and said I'd take the call outside on the porch where it was quieter. I was out there maybe 10 minutes. The air was cold. While I was on the call, I looked out across the neighboring houses, the blue glow of television screens flickering behind curtains. When the call ended, I took a breath and walked back inside, and I knew something had changed. There was no obvious scene, no dramatic embrace, nothing concrete enough to count as evidence. Just different air. Emily was sitting on one end of the couch. Jake was in the armchair across from her. Too far apart, too carefully arranged, too much like two people who had just realized they needed to look normal. The TV was still on, but the volume had been turned down so low it was barely a murmur. They both turned to look at me at exactly the same time. The glance lasted only a second, but it sent a chill straight down my back. I picked up my beer, sat down, and forced myself to ignore it. Jake spoke first. "Your company always acts like it's saving the world." Emily laughed, but her laugh sounded thin. I laughed too. I even remember telling myself, "You're overthinking this, Dan. Stop turning your own life into a movie." That's what the mind does when it's trying to protect you. It covers your eyes, even while your instincts are pounding against your ribs. That night when Jake left, Emily went upstairs first. I stayed behind to lock the door. Through the glass at the front of the house, I saw Jake standing beside his car for a few extra seconds, like he was waiting for something. Then he looked up toward the second floor, where the bedroom light was still on. I saw that, and I still let it go. There are truths you don't fully see until you are finally ready to let them destroy you. Before that, you will do almost anything to explain them into something smaller. 5. The moment the truth found me on its own, I found out on a Tuesday morning. Not because I was especially clever, not because I had set some perfect trap. It happened by accident. Emily had rushed out early for a meeting downtown and left her phone on the kitchen counter beside her brown wallet. I was pouring coffee into a travel mug when her phone lit up and buzzed, and up until that exact second, I had never once gone through my wife's phone on purpose. That wasn't who I was. But when the screen lit up, my eyes landed on the sender's name before I could stop them. Jake. My heart dropped so hard it felt physical. Even then, it still wasn't enough to convict anyone. Friends text each other. That's normal. People send weird things. People joke. Then the preview line appeared under his name. "I miss you already." I went completely still. The coffee in my hand was hot enough to burn, but I didn't let go. For the first few seconds, my mind did what terrified people's minds always do. It ran in every direction searching for mercy. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe he sent it to the wrong person. Maybe it meant something else. Maybe. All the maybes in the world could not prepare me for what I saw when I opened her phone. Emily hadn't changed the passcode, or maybe she thought she would never need to hide herself from me that completely. The message thread opened like a door to hell. It wasn't just a few flirty messages. It wasn't one bad night. It wasn't some vague emotional affair you could still force into a softer category. and pretend maybe it had never fully crossed the line. It was everything. A second relationship. Complete. Ongoing. Built over time. It had history, rhythm, habits, private codes, pictures, plans. Inside jokes that I had never been allowed to understand. I scrolled up, then down. Messages from 2 years earlier. Love notes. Hotel meetups I never knew about. Nights Jake came over to watch the game, when he had really come for Emily. Weekends when I drove alone to visit my mother in Dayton, because Emily said she had too much work. Photos of wine glasses, hotel sheets, someone's hand stretched across white bedding. Then I found a message Emily had sent Jake on the night of our 5th wedding anniversary. He's asleep. I wish it was you here instead. I think that was the moment I stopped breathing. I sat down at the kitchen chair, like my legs had disappeared underneath me. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. I don't know how long I sat there. 5 minutes, 40, maybe more. Time didn't feel like time anymore. It felt warped and heavy, like something had bent in the room and left me trapped inside. Then I kept reading, and I found the lines that still, even now, make something in my jaw tighten when I remember them. He never notices anything. Dan's too predictable. Sometimes I almost feel bad. Almost. He trusts you like a brother. That's what makes it so easy. That last one was from Emily. I read it again, then again, like my brain simply refused to accept that the woman who had slept beside me for 6 years could have typed something like that with her own hand. Then I opened the photos. I shouldn't have, but I did. Not because I was curious, because once the truth rips a hole through your life, you don't stop at the edge of it. You stare all the way down, even when you know it is going to ruin you. There were pictures of their hands together, a selfie in Jake's car, and one taken in my living room. My living room. I recognized the blue throw pillow on the couch behind them. I recognized the framed print on the wall. I recognized the lamp I had bought at Target during a sale in November. I was looking at my own house inside my wife's affair with my best friend, and something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not in the dramatic way movies always imagine. Just a quiet split somewhere in the center of my chest. I set the phone down, then picked it back up. I took screenshots, sent them to my work email, saved them to the cloud. I moved with this strange, detached precision, like I was watching another man do it for me. When Emily called nearly an hour later, I answered. Hey, I left my phone there. Can you? Yeah, I said, and my own voice sounded unfamiliar to me. I'll bring it tonight or you can come get it. Thanks, babe. Love you. I didn't answer for 1 second too long. Then I said, yeah. When the call ended, I went into the bathroom and threw up. Zix. The silence of a man being split in half later, after everything came out. People kept asking me the same question. Why didn't I drive straight to Emily? Why didn't I call Jake that second? Why didn't I smash something? Why didn't I scream? The truth is, I don't fully understand it myself. All I know is that after the first wave of shock, something cold moved through me. Not peace, not calm, numbness, kind of numbness that takes over when you realize the life you have been standing inside may not have been real at all. That night Emily came home around 7. She stepped into the kitchen and kissed my cheek like always. How was your day? Fine. Where's my phone? On the table. In memory, I want to believe I spoke differently. More distant, more aware. But the truth is, I still sounded normal. That's what's so terrifying. The body keeps performing the old life, long after the heart has been torn open. Emily picked up the phone and looked at me quickly. Thanks, I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, I had no idea who the woman standing in front of me actually was. She still had the same face, the same pale brown eyes, that same loose strand of hair that always slipped near her cheek. But beneath all of that was a woman who could sit across from me at dinner, ask if I wanted more pasta, and then go upstairs and text Jake that she missed him. We ate dinner together that night. Spaghetti and meatballs. Emily told me about a difficult client. I nodded in the right places, asked a couple of normal questions. If someone had recorded that dinner in secret, they would have seen a completely ordinary marriage. But inside me, every nerve felt like it was on fire. When Emily went upstairs to shower, I stayed in the kitchen alone. The light over the stove cast a small yellow pool across the counter. I stared into the dark window above the sink and understood something with painful clarity. If I exploded that night, I would lose the one thing I still had left, control, and I didn't want to lose anything else. I had already lost enough. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I drove to a lawyer's office an old coworker had recommended. Her name was Rachel Monroe. The office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building. The hallway smelled faintly like burnt coffee, and somewhere in the background, a printer kept spitting out pages. Rachel looked to be in her 40s. Low voice, sharp eyes, the kind of person who made you feel that if the room caught fire, she'd be the calmest one in it. She let me talk. I told her everything, from beginning to end. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, because I still felt like a man describing the wreckage of a car accident. He hadn't yet accepted he'd survive. When I finished, Rachel slid a box of tissues across the desk. I never touched them. Daniel, she said, the first thing you need to do is make sure they do not know you know. I stared at her. Really? Yes. Back up everything. Gather financial records. Secure your personal accounts. Do not leave the house without a plan. And do not confront either of them while you're in this state. I feel like I'm losing my mind. No, she said. You are being betrayed. That is not the same thing. That sentence held me together for weeks afterward, so I did exactly what she told me to do. I backed up all the screenshots, printed bank statements, mortgage papers, insurance documents, retirement accounts, changed the passwords on my personal email, savings, cloud storage, everything. Opened a separate private account, and then I kept living like nothing had happened. I still went to work, still ate breakfast with Emily, still texted Jake about Sunday football. I'm not proud of that performance, but that was the first time in my life I understood that silence is not always weakness. Sometimes silence is survival. 7. Once you see it, you see all of it. The strangest thing about the truth is that once it arrives, it rearranges the path. Every tiny detail that once seemed harmless suddenly clicks into place. It's like you've spent years staring at disconnected puzzle pieces without realizing they belong to the same picture. Then one day, the picture appears all at once, and after that, you can't not see it. I started noticing everything. Emily always placed her phone face down whenever I entered a room. Jake began avoiding my eyes every now and then, though only for a fraction of a second. Most of the time, he still acted normal. That may have been one of the ugliest parts of all of it. My best friend had been able to look me in the face and speak to me like nothing had changed while sleeping with my wife behind my back. One time, the three of us went out for brunch. The waitress asked Emily what she wanted, and before she could even answer, Jake said, "Egg white omelet, no cheese, hot sauce on the side." Emily gave a quick, awkward smile. Yeah, that. I sat across from them with both hands around my water glass, and the only thought in my head was this: how does Jake know her better than I do? Another time, Emily was looking for her denim jacket. I said it was probably in the laundry room. Jake had been in the house less than 2 minutes when he pointed toward the cabinet by the garage door. No, I think you left it there last time. He corrected himself immediately after, but I still caught it. That automatic familiarity, that unconscious ease. Nobody said anything, but I saw it. I saw Emily lower her eyes. I saw Jake grab a beer too quickly, like motion might save him from the silence that had just opened up. I began to understand that for 2 years, they hadn't just been sleeping together. They had built a private world, a world made of habits, shared rhythms, small details only people who are too close to each other know. And I had been standing outside that world like a fool. There were nights Emily lay next to me texting under the covers. I could hear the faint vibration against the mattress. Once, when she fell asleep on the couch, her phone lit up beside her. I didn't even need to get close. Just seeing the name was enough. Jake. After that, I started keeping notes. Dates, times, phone calls. The mornings Emily suddenly had Pilates. The afternoons Jake just happened to be in the area. The nights I came home late, and Emily was freshly showered even though she claimed she'd been home all day. I hated the person I was becoming in that stretch of time. A man quietly watching his own wife like a stranger. A man who listened for every car outside like it was a warning. A man forced to act stupid in order to uncover a truth he should never have had to search for. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If I was going to end this, I needed the truth in a form they could never deny. Not for them. They already knew what they had done. For me. So that later, on the weakest nights, I would never be able to lie to myself and wonder if I had overreacted, misunderstood, imagined part of it, made it uglier than it really was. I needed something sharp enough to cut through every illusion I still had left. Late, I started collecting evidence like a stranger inside my own life. I bought a small hidden camera online, one of those tiny ones disguised as a digital photo frame that could sit on a shelf in the living room without anyone thinking twice about it. I sat in the Best Buy parking lot for almost half an hour before I went inside to buy it. I remember walking past rows of televisions, gaming consoles, phones, People chatting with sales associates about warranties and cable. No one looked at me twice. No one knew I was there trying to confirm whether my wife was betraying me inside our house. I hated myself for buying that camera. I hated having to become the kind of man who installed, but I hated not knowing even more. I set it up one afternoon when Emily said she'd be working from a coffee shop, and Jake was supposedly in Toledo with a client. When I stepped back and looked at the frame sitting there in my own living room, I felt like I had crossed some moral boundary inside myself. Then I remembered the messages. The line Emily had typed about how easy it was because I trusted him like a brother. Whatever guilt I had left disappeared. Then the camera gave me more than enough. One Friday just before noon, I told Emily I had to go into the office for an emergency review. Instead, I parked in a shopping center lot 10 minutes from the house and opened the camera feed on my laptop. At 11:47, the front door opened. Jake walked in. No knock, no waiting. No text first. He just stepped inside like he belonged there. My heartbeat got so violent I could hear it in my ears. Emily came into frame from the kitchen. She was wearing the gray sweater dress I once told her made her look soft and warm. Jake walked toward her, and the two of them wrapped themselves around each other like people who had been waiting all day for that exact moment. Not the casual hug of friends, not even close, the hug of two people who knew each other's bodies. Then they kissed, right there in the middle of my living room, beneath our wedding photo above the fireplace. I had always imagined that if I ever saw something like that, I would explode. Instead, I went cold, so cold I couldn't even feel the coffee cup in my hand anymore. I watched them leave the frame. Then, more than an hour later, I watched them come back. Emily leaned into Jake on the couch. He stroked her hair. They talked too softly for the camera to pick everything up, but one line came through clearly. Emily said, "I hate pretending with him." Jake gave this low, dry laugh. "But you're still doing it." Emily went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know." Jake asked, "How much longer?" Emily didn't answer right away. And then she said something I will probably remember until the day I die. "I don't know. Dan is more fragile than you think. Not Dan deserves better. Not Dan doesn't deserve this. Just Dan is more fragile than you think." As if I were not a person she had loved, but a problem to be managed carefully. I closed the laptop, sat in the car, and stared at the parking lot while the rest of the world kept moving. A woman lifting a toddler out of a car seat. Two teenage boys laughing over a shopping cart full of junk food. An older man in a baseball cap walking slowly toward the entrance. Ordinary life kept going, while mine was being dragged through broken glass. That night, Emily asked why I was so quiet. "I'm just tired." She put her hand on my shoulder. That touch made every muscle in my body fight the urge to recoil. "You're working too hard," she said, and I stared at her hand on my shoulder and wondered who it had touched just a few hours earlier. That kind of disgust is hard to explain unless you've lived through it. It gets into your memories. It stains even the good ones. Nothing feels clean afterward. 9. The rainy night and Jake's car outside my house near the end of October. I decided to do the one thing I had been avoiding. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. I told Emily I had a late work meeting and might grab dinner afterward with the audit team. She agreed too quickly, too easily. She even asked if I wanted her to keep food warm in the oven for me. I said no. Then I drove away, turned down a couple of side streets, and parked in a dark spot near the neighborhood mailbox cluster. It was raining lightly that night, the kind of rain that turns the windshield silver and makes the streetlights blur at the edges. I shut the engine off, but left the wipers running slowly. The silence inside the car felt unbearable, so I waited. The first 15 minutes moved like they were dragging themselves through mud. I kept looking at the clock on the dashboard, then at the front of my house, then down at my phone. Some stupid, desperate part of me was still hoping for mercy. Maybe nothing would happen tonight. Maybe Emily would just stay home. Maybe Jake wouldn't come. At exactly 7:32, headlights turned onto my street. Jake's black SUV. It slowed in front of my house and parked in the same spot he always used when he came over to watch games with me. He stepped out, lifted the collar of his jacket against the rain, and jogged to the porch. Emily opened the door almost immediately, just enough to let him inside. Then the door closed behind him. No knock, no hesitation. "No, I'm here" text. I sat frozen behind the streaked glass. My house glowed with soft yellow light behind the curtain. The house where I had painted the fence myself. The house where I once imagined children running up and down the stairs. The house Emily and I had bought together. standing in an empty living room laughing like fools because we had finally built something of our own. Now it looked like someone else's life. I don't know how long I sat there, probably close to 2 hours. At one point, I thought I was going to storm inside, grab Jake by the throat, and beat him until my hands broke. At another point, I just sat there with my forehead resting against the steering wheel, breathing in short, shallow bursts like a man trying not to drown. At another point, I stared at the house and wondered whether Emily had ever, in any of those 2 years, looked at me and truly felt guilt, or whether by then she had already drifted too far beyond guilt for it to matter. The rain got heavier. Water ran down the windshield in clear streams. When Jake finally came out, it was close to 10. He stood under the porch for a second. Emily followed him out, folding her arms against the cold. In the porch light, I watched him lean down and kiss her one more time before he went to his car. Emily stood there watching until his taillights disappeared. Then she went back inside, and that was the moment I understood something final. I was no longer waiting for a confession. I was no longer waiting for a miracle that might make the truth smaller. I had one thing left to do, end it, but end it in a way they could never rewrite. Never twist into some version where I was unstable, jealous, unreasonable, cruel. I wanted the truth standing in the middle of the room, naked, with nowhere left for either of them to run. 10. I didn't want revenge. I wanted them to see themselves from the outside. Maybe it would sound like I was planning some cold act of revenge. It wasn't that simple. I'm not a man built for vengeance. I didn't wake up every morning wanting to destroy them. In the days after that rainy night, I still hurt in a painfully human way. I still woke up at 3 in the morning with my heart pounding. I still sat in bathroom stalls at work, fighting nausea. I still had moments where I looked at a mug Emily had bought me and had to blink back tears. I didn't want revenge, at least not in the cartoon version of it. I didn't want to smash Jake's car, didn't want to dump everything online, didn't want to call Emily's parents screaming. What I wanted was something else. I wanted to take the story away from them, because I knew exactly what would happen if I confronted them privately. They would do what cheaters always do when they're cornered. They would edit. Emily would say she was lonely. Jake would say he never meant for it to happen. Both of them would say it was complicated. They would talk about pain and confusion and mistakes, as if my suffering were some tragic accident instead of the result of hundreds of choices made in secret. I didn't want that. I wanted to remove their power over the story. Rachel agreed. If you confront them, she told me during our third phone call, do it only after the legal and financial side is secure. Don't let emotion lead. I asked her, what would you do? She was quiet for a moment. Personally, I'd let them expose themselves in front of witnesses. No screaming, no threats. The truth is already powerful enough. That sentence stayed with me. Let them expose themselves in front of witnesses. A week later, I texted the group of mutual friends. Friday dinner at our place. Been a while. Nate answered first with some dumb meme, the way he always did. Lauren said she'd bring pie. Marcus and Tessa said yes. Jake replied last. Wouldn't miss it. I stared at those words for a long time. Emily noticed I was planning the dinner and looked mildly surprised. What's the occasion? I just felt like getting everyone together. That's sweet. She smiled and kissed my cheek. For one split second, I nearly asked her whether she had any idea how sick her smile made me feel now. But I didn't. I just nodded. All that week, I prepared like a husband hosting a normal dinner. Bought the meat, bought the wine, cleaned the yard, wiped the TV screen in the living room. At the same time, I built a folder on my laptop. Screenshots, video clips, dates, times, evidence. I even chose an old wedding photo of the three of us, me, Emily, and Jake, as the opening slide. Not to be theatrical, just because I wanted people to see exactly what we used to be before they saw what we had become. I didn't sleep the night before the dinner. Emily lay beside me breathing steadily. I stared into the dark for hours. There was a moment when I almost canceled everything. Thought maybe a quiet divorce would be easier, less messy, less humiliating. But then I remembered the jokes about me in the messages. Remembered Jake walking into my house without knocking. Remembered that kiss under the porch in the rain. And I understood silence had helped me survive, but now silence would only help them keep their dignity. I didn't owe them that. 11. The last dinner Friday night came cold and clear. The first sharp edge of winter was in the air, the kind of cold that dries the pavement, darkens the sky early, and makes your breath visible the second you step outside. Emily wore a dark dress, simple, elegant, beautiful. Her hair was up, and she was wearing the teardrop earrings I had given her on our 4th anniversary. She stood in the kitchen slicing garlic bread while the light fell across her collarbone. And for one short, brutal second, my chest ached with the memory of the woman I had once loved. That's another thing people outside this kind of pain don't understand. You can still look at the person who destroyed you and feel a strange mix of disgust and longing. Not because they deserve it, because feeling doesn't shut off on command. Jake arrived almost exactly on time, carrying a bottle of bourbon more expensive than the kind he usually brought. "For the host," he said, smiling as he handed it to me. I took it. "Thanks." Our fingers touched for a second. I looked him in the eye. He had no idea that by the end of the night, he would be erased from my life forever. The others arrived soon after, the house filled with the sounds it had once always held so naturally. Greetings, laughter, coats being taken off, wine being poured. Lauren complimented the smell of the roast before she was even fully through the door. Nate opened the fridge like it was his own. Marcus told a story about the neighbor's dog chewing through a string of lights. Tessa asked Emily about Christmas plans. If someone had walked in then, they would have seen the exact picture of normal suburban American life. Sweaters, red wine, a roast dinner in the oven, soft jazz in the kitchen. A group of middle-class friends settling in for the night. The surface of life is always beautiful. We sat down around 7:30. Emily at one end of the table, me at the other, Jake off to the left, closer to her than I wanted him to be, but still perfectly innocent in the eyes of everyone else. I watched them all through dinner, the way Emily avoided holding Jake's gaze too long, the way Jake was careful, too careful, with every word he directed at her, the way both of them seemed to tighten whenever I spoke. I think they sensed something. Not all of it, but enough. The body knows when the temperature in a room changes. Lauren talked about her new office. Nate complained about the Browns. Jake told some story about a client that made the whole table laugh. Emily poured more wine. I laughed when I needed to, passed plates when I needed to, answered when I needed to. Part of me had separated and was watching the whole thing in slow motion. This was the table Emily and I had assembled together on our first night in the house. Jake had helped carry the heavier pieces. These were the friends who had toasted our engagement. This was the room where we had once celebrated Emily's birthday. And in just a few minutes, everything in it was going to split open. By the time dessert came around, Lauren had gotten up to grab the pie she brought. Nate was asking if I wanted to put the game highlights on after dinner. I set my wine glass down. My hands did not shake. That surprised even me. "There's something I want to show everyone first." Emily looked up. "What is it?" I looked at her. "Just something I think everyone deserves to know." The air around the table changed. Only slightly, but enough. I stood up, grabbed my laptop from the shelf near the living room, and plugged it into the TV. The big screen lit up, throwing reflections across the windows and everyone's faces. Jake set his glass down a little too carefully. "Dan, what is this?" I turned to him. "You'll see." I opened the folder. The first image filled the screen. Our wedding photo. Me in the middle, Emily on one side, Jake on the other, his hand on my shoulder. All three of us smiling at the camera like the world was safe. Lauren let out a soft little laugh. "Wow, that feels like forever ago." I clicked to the next slide. The first message appeared. "I miss you already." The room went silent. Then another slide. Then another. Dates, messages, inside jokes, the lines about me, photos that weren't explicit but didn't need to be. Everyone understood. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the heating system in the hallway. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The truth had started speaking for itself. 12. The moment the masks fell, truth never lands beautifully. It doesn't arrive with music or clean dramatic timing. It hits in uglier ways. Blood draining from faces, hands freezing in place, eyes searching the room for a way out that doesn't exist. Emily reacted first. "Daniel," her voice was dry and cracked, almost hollow. I clicked to the video, and there it was on the screen. My living room in the middle of the day, Emily stepping in from the kitchen, Jake walking straight toward her and kissing her. No ambiguity left. No, "you misunderstood." No, it was just emotional. No, nothing happened. The whole room froze. Lauren covered her mouth. Nate swore under his breath. Marcus looked away for a moment like he physically couldn't take. Jake stood up so fast his chair scraped hard against the floor. "Dan, turn that off." I turned and looked at him. For the first time in weeks, my voice felt fully mine again. "Sit down." He didn't. Emily started crying. "Say something." Jake snapped at her, then turned back toward me. "This isn't the way to..." "The way to what?" I asked. I wasn't shouting. That made it worse. I stood there with my arms at my sides and my voice so low and steady that the calm itself frightened them. This isn't the way for me to find out you've been walking into my house when I'm gone. This isn't the way for people to find out my wife and my best friend spent 2 years laughing in my face. Jake opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Emily stood up slowly, her face so pale it had gone gray. Daniel, please. Can we talk privately? I looked at her. Privately, I said. For 2 years, you and him did everything privately. Tonight, you don't get that? I don't know how badly that line hit her. I only know that when I said it, something inside me stopped shaking. Tessa whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath. Lauren couldn't even look at Emily anymore. Nate stood so suddenly his chair scraped backward. "I can't sit here for this," he said, voice thick with shock. Marcus stepped over and squeezed my shoulder once before heading toward the door. Jake tried taking a step toward me. "Dan, man to man, don't." Just one word. But I put everything into it. 6 years of friendship, 2 years of lies. Every hour I spent sitting in my car, looking at my own house like it belonged to someone else. Jake stopped moving, and for the first time, he looked smaller to me. No longer the guy who could charm a room. No longer the guy who could talk his way through anything. Just a man exposed in the middle of the home he had walked into like it was partly his. Emily kept crying. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I looked at her. You would think I would have felt triumphant in that moment. I didn't. I felt empty, because when the person you once loved breaks down in the ruins they built themselves, it doesn't feel like victory. It just feels like death. Lauren grabbed her coat. Tessa followed her. Nate left without looking at Jake. Marcus was the last one out. He paused at the door, looked back at me and said, "Call me if you need anything." I nodded. Then the door closed, and the house went silent. Just me, Emily, Jake, 3 people who had once meant the most to each other, now standing inside wreckage. 13. Excuses always come too late, Jake spoke first. Of course he did. He had always been the one who believed words could save him. "Dan, this didn't start the way you think." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so painfully predictable. "What do you think I think?" Jake swallowed. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I looked at him for a long time. Then I asked, "You didn't mean to hurt me for 2 years?" He had nothing. Emily wrapped her arms around herself like she was freezing. "Daniel, I know I was wrong. I know. But what happened between us? It got complicated." I turned to her. What exactly was complicated? I was lonely. There it was, of course. Lonely, distance, pressure, all the soft language people use to dress up betrayal, so it sounds more human than it was. "You were lonely," I repeated, "and your answer was to sleep with my best friend." Emily started crying harder. "Please don't say it like that." "Why not?" I said, my voice rising for the first time. "That is exactly what you did." Jake stepped in. "Don't put all of this on her." I turned to him. "Be quiet. You don't get to speak for either of you." He clenched his jaw and shut up. I walked over to the fireplace, where our wedding photo still stood in its frame. The one with the 3 of us. I lifted it and held it up toward Jake. "Do you remember this day?" Jake looked at the photo, eyes red. "Dan, you stood next to me in that church," I said. "You watched me promise to love that woman for the rest of my life. You drank with me the night before my wedding. You told me I was the luckiest man you knew. And then you did this. In my house." Jake dragged a hand over his face. "I know I'm a terrible person." "No," I said. "You only know that now because you got caught. If you really knew it then, you wouldn't have been able to keep doing it." Emily took a step toward me, mascara running. "Please, just let me explain everything." I looked at her. "Fine, explain," and she did. She talked about how much I worked, how we had been drifting, how Jake listened to her, how it started with conversations that felt harmless, how the first time crossing the line happened after one of my work trips, how she meant to stop, how every time she tried, she failed, how she hated herself, how in some way she still loved me. I stood there and listened to all of it. Didn't interrupt, didn't shout. When she finished, the whole house felt as silent as a funeral home. Then I asked one question. "If you hated yourself that much, why did you text him that I never noticed anything?" Emily froze. That hit harder than anything else I'd said. Because loneliness can be used as an excuse. Confusion can be used as an excuse. But mockery cannot. Mockery proves it wasn't just weakness. It was contempt. Emily stepped back like she had been slapped. Jake lowered his head. I set the wedding photo back down. "Jake, get your coat and get out of my house." He stood there for a second as if waiting for something more. One last opening. One sign that somewhere underneath all this, we were still brothers. I gave him nothing. At the door, he turned once. "I'm sorry," I met his eyes. "You should say that to the version of me who still loved you." Then he left. The door shut. The click of the lock sounded tiny, but inside me, it landed like a sentence. 14. That night I learned what losing trust sounds like after Jake left. Emily just stood in the living room and cried. No audience anymore. No performance left. No image to protect. Just a woman stripped bare of her lies. And a man who no longer looked at her with love. "Where do you want me to go?" she asked after a long time. I didn't answer immediately. I looked around the room. The knitted blanket Emily loved was still folded over the arm of the couch. 2 half-finished glasses of wine sat on the table. Lauren's pie was still on the counter, untouched, like it belonged to some other version of reality. Everything ordinary was still there, and yet the house felt like it had burned down from the inside. "You can go to Megan's," I said, "or a hotel, but you're not staying here tonight." Emily shook like she had been hit. "Daniel, no," I cut her off. "I can't look at you in this house tonight." She nodded and went upstairs to pack some things. I stood below in the kitchen listening to drawers open and shut, footsteps across the floor, a bag rolling over hardwood. Every sound felt sharp. When Emily came downstairs again, she looked strangely small. No longer the woman who handled everything. No longer the woman who knew how to smooth over every social situation, every stress, every practical problem. Just a frightened person. "Are you going to divorce me?" she asked. I looked at her, and in my head, too many images collided at once. Emily smiling at me in the bookstore. Emily barefoot in the backyard after we first moved in. Emily in the kitchen at Christmas, with her nose pink from the heat of the oven. And Emily on the TV screen, kissing Jake beneath our wedding photo. "The moment you chose to do this a second time," I said, "this marriage was already over. Tonight was just the first time I was forced to see it." Emily doubled over crying. I opened the front door. She stepped out onto the porch. Then she turned back one last time. "I never wanted to make you into a fool." Something cold inside me almost laughed. "But you did." Then she left. I locked the door and stood there with my back against it for a long time. People think that when the cheater finally leaves, the betrayed person collapses immediately. I didn't. I went through the house, turned off the TV, poured the wine into the sink, put the pie in the refrigerator, loaded the dishes into the dishwasher. Those tiny tasks were the only things keeping me from coming apart. When I was done, I sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets. The house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. And then finally I cried. Not gracefully, not like in movies, the kind of crying that makes your chest ache, your breath break, your whole body fold inward because it feels like if you don't hold yourself together physically, you will fall apart. I cried for my marriage, for my friendship, for my home, for the version of me who had once stood in church looking at those 2 people and thinking, "I'm safe now." That man died that night. 15. The days after were quiet wreckage. An event like that doesn't end when the guests leave the house. It keeps living in every morning after, in every room, in every habit. The days after the dinner, my phone barely stopped buzzing. Friends texted asking if I was okay. Emily's sister, Megan, called twice. I didn't answer the first time. The second time I picked up and she said only one thing: "I'm so sorry." I didn't know. I believed her. Emily's parents sent me an email. Long, kind, ashamed, full of pain. I couldn't answer it right away. Jake sent me one long message, then another, then called. I blocked his number. Emily emailed me from Megan's house. The first email asked if we could talk. The second was longer, explaining everything from her point of view, saying she didn't expect forgiveness, only hoped I would understand that it wasn't simple. I read it and felt tired more than angry. Because that's the thing. To the person who cheats, it always has to be complicated. Otherwise, they can't live with themselves. To the person being betrayed, it is simple. I trusted. You lied. That is enough. I worked with Rachel, prepared paperwork, organized finances, set times for Emily to come, get her things when I wouldn't be home, changed the garage code, changed the Wi-Fi password, moved automatic payments around. All of it was practical, and all of it was cruel. Every form, every account, every signature line was another way of organizing the death of a marriage. One Sunday afternoon, I went into the garage and found our Christmas boxes stacked in the corner. On top was a roll of red ribbon Emily had once said we should save for next year. I stood there staring at it for so long, I finally had to walk outside because I couldn't breathe. I stopped sleeping properly. My body stayed on alert like the disaster still hadn't fully passed. Some nights I woke up from dreams where Jake was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee like nothing had changed. Some nights I dreamed Emily was lying next to me, and when I turned toward her, Her face changed into someone else's. Rachel suggested therapy after one of our meetings, when I must have looked hollow enough to make it obvious. So I went. My therapist was named Dr. Harper. He didn't talk much. Mostly he asked questions that forced me to sit with things instead of circling them. What hurts most? He asked me one day. What they did? No, he said. What about what they did? I sat there for a long time. Then I finally said, they made all my good memories feel contaminated. Dr. Harper nodded. That's what betrayal does. It doesn't only destroy the present, it reaches backward and stains the past. That was exactly right. I started replaying everything through new eyes. The barbecues Jake always seemed to time perfectly. The nights Emily told me to go to bed without her. The girls' trip I now knew had been a lie. The entire 2 years felt like a movie where somebody had gone back and changed the soundtrack. And suddenly every scene meant something darker. It made me feel insane, but it also showed me that I had done the right thing by exposing them in daylight. Because if I hadn't, there would always have been some weak part of me asking whether maybe I had exaggerated it, maybe it hadn't been that bad, maybe there was another explanation. No, it was that bad. I saw it, and painful as that truth was, it also saved me. 16, the last conversation with Emily about 3 weeks later. Emily asked if we could meet in person to sign a few remaining papers and say whatever needed to be said one last time. Rachel told me I didn't have to, but I agreed, not because I wanted her back, because I didn't want to drag unfinished words into the next part of my life. We met at a coffee shop far from home, somewhere no one would know us. The sky was gray. The day was cold. The cafe smelled like strong roasted coffee and damp coats. Emily was already there when I arrived. She had lost weight, barely wore makeup. None of her usual polished composure remained. When I walked in, she stood halfway up, then sat again. I sat across from her. Silence hung between us for a long time. Then Emily said, "I'm not asking you to forgive me." "Then what are you asking for?" She turned the paper cup slowly in her hands. "I want you to know that some parts of our marriage were real." I looked at her. "What is that supposed to do for me?" Emily's eyes filled. "I don't know. Maybe I just can't stand the thought that all of it was fake." I leaned back. "Emily, the worst part isn't that you loved someone else. People change. Love ends. If one day you had sat me down and told me you didn't love me anymore, I would have been devastated, but I still would have respected the truth." Emily dropped her gaze. "What destroyed everything," I said, "is that you looked me in the face every day and chose to lie. Again and again. You turned me into an audience member in my own life. You let me laugh with him, invite him over, shake his hand, pour him drinks, while you were sleeping with him behind my back. You let me blame myself for a marriage going cold. You let me try to fix something you had already been secretly breaking." Tears fell onto the lid of her coffee cup. "I know, no," I said quietly. "You know now. Back then you didn't know. Back then you chose what made you feel better." She sat there, crying, and for the first time since everything came apart, she wasn't defending herself. Then she said Jake's name. "Jake said you'll never forgive me." That was the first time his name had been spoken out loud between us since the dinner. We're not seeing each other anymore. And the strangest thing was I felt almost nothing hearing that. No satisfaction, no triumph, just distance. That was when I realized I had already moved farther from the first raw wound than I thought. "Why tell me that?" She laughed a little through tears, bitterly. "Maybe because I thought if you knew it still wasn't worth losing you then. Maybe I'm even worse than I thought." I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw that she had finally reached the place where there were no more elegant explanations left. Just the truth. She had traded too much for something that could not survive in the light. "Did you love him?" I asked. Emily took a long time to answer. Then she said, "I don't know what I love. Sometimes I thought I did. Other times, I think I was just addicted to the feeling of being wanted. With Jake, there were no bills, no mortgage, no dentist appointments, no dishes in the sink. Just the easy parts." I let out a dry laugh. Of course, any relationship hidden in the dark is always going to feel lighter than the one carrying real life. Emily cried harder. "I'm sorry, that time I didn't argue. Not because it fixed anything, because I had finally realized some apologies don't exist to repair the damage. They exist only to mark the place where repair is no longer possible." I stood up. Emily looked up in panic. "So this is it?" I looked at her for a long moment. "No," I said. "It's been over for a long time. Today is just the first day you're hearing the door close." Then I walked out. I didn't look back, and for the first time in weeks, I took a full breath without feeling pain spread across my chest. 17. Jake disappeared from my life. The way cowards always do. I never saw Jake in person again after that night. I heard he transferred to another sales region. He stopped going to the gym we used to go to together. A lot of people in our friend group cut him off completely. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. One afternoon, Nate called and said Jake wanted to meet man to man and talk it through. I actually laughed out loud. Man to man, I said. He remembered that phrase a little too late. Nate never brought it up again. Sometimes I wondered whether Jake had ever really loved Emily at all, or whether what he loved was the thrill of winning something forbidden, of being chosen, of stepping into another man's stable life, and convincing himself that he was special enough to make someone destroy everything. But eventually, I stopped wondering, because the more you try to find clean logic inside betrayal, the more you trap yourself inside a maze built by selfishness. What I know is this: Jake was the man I would have called first if my car broke down on the highway. The man I asked to be my best man without even thinking. The man who sat with me all night after my father died and didn't try to fill the silence with empty words. All of that had once been real too, and that's what makes betrayal so difficult to grieve. The person who betrays you is rarely a monster from the beginning. They were good to you once. They showed up once. They laughed with you, helped you, held pieces of your life. So when they betray you, you don't just lose the present version of them. You lose the past version too. The one you trusted, the one you loved. I think that is its own kind of funeral. Person who is still alive, but can never exist inside your heart the way they used to. That is what Jake became to me. No fistfight, no cinematic confrontation in a parking lot, no final speech about brotherhood, just over, a closed door, a deleted number, an empty chair in every memory still to come. And honestly, that may have been the fairest punishment, to be cut out forever from the life of someone who once loved you without question. 18. A month later, the house was still a house, just not a home. Emily moved out within the month. She collected her things in stages, always warning me first, always when I wasn't home. I would come back and notice pieces of her slowly disappearing. Her coat no longer on the hook, her makeup gone from the bathroom, her flower-arranging books missing from the kitchen shelf, the beige throw pillows she picked out disappearing from the couch. The house grew emptier and, strangely, easier to breathe in. That was one of the hardest contradictions I have ever lived through. Pain because something was gone, relief because I no longer had to share air with a lie. One night near the end of that month, I stood in the kitchen making decaf coffee out of habit even though it was nearly 10. Outside, the first thin snow of the season was falling. Tiny flakes hit the back window and disappeared. I looked out at the yard and realized the house was quiet in a way it hadn't been for months. Not the kind of quiet full of secrets. Actual quiet. No hidden messages. No familiar car outside making my stomach twist. No feeling that someone was living a second life inside my home. That quiet wasn't joyful, but it was clean. And after a long betrayal, clean becomes a luxury. The divorce itself, of course, did not finish in 1 month. Real life never moves as quickly as a dramatic story does. But by then, in every way that mattered emotionally, the marriage was already over. The paperwork was moving. The assets were being divided. Emily was living elsewhere. We only spoke when absolutely necessary. Everything else was just signatures and time. One Sunday night, I cooked myself a steak and sat in front of the television without even turning it on. I stared at the reflection of the kitchen in the black screen and realized I was no longer waiting for the front door to open. Not for Emily, not for Jake, not for some explanation that might soften the past. That waiting was gone. I started running in the mornings, at first because I couldn't sleep, then because it became routine. The world is different very early in the morning. The streets still damp with dew, the cold stinging your lungs, the corner coffee shop just opening, the smell of pastries drifting out into the air. I ran past nearly identical suburban houses, American flags hanging from porches, cars still covered in mist. Everything so ordinary it almost felt meaningless. And somehow that ordinariness brought me back to myself. Not some great lesson, not a perfect speech, just small things done again and again. Tying my shoes, opening the door, stepping outside, living through one more day. 19. Some wounds do not close. They just stop bleeding if you're waiting for the kind of ending where I say I forgot all about it, found someone else, and went on to live happily ever after. That's not how this story goes. At least not quickly. Some days I was okay. Some days I went to work, sat through meetings, laughed with coworkers, came home, cooked dinner, watched a documentary, and fell asleep like my life had not once been shattered. And then there were other days. Days when the smell of a certain perfume in a grocery store was enough to drag me right back to that Tuesday morning in the kitchen. Days when I heard someone joking about backyard barbecues with the whole family and a couple of my best friends, and had to abandon my cart in the middle of the store because my throat locked up. Betrayal is not just one wound. It rewires you. Your brain learns suspicion. Your heart learns to tighten before it opens. Even when you don't want to, you start noticing things other people don't. Who laughs too long? Who turns their phone over? Who answers too quickly? Who answers too slowly? Dr. Harper told me that was normal. Your body is trying to protect you from being destroyed twice. So when does it stop? I ask. It may never disappear completely, but over time, you'll learn when it is telling you the truth and when it is simply afraid. That took me a long time to understand. Trust after betrayal doesn't come back in the same shape. It is no longer innocent. It becomes careful, selective, boundaried, and while that is sad, it is not the worst thing. The worst thing would have been letting the affair turn me bitter enough that nothing good could ever reach me again. I came very close to that, closer than I like admitting. Then one day my mother called and asked if I could come down to Dayton and help her replace the porch light bulb. A ridiculous, ordinary kind of mother request. I drove down. We ate chicken soup and crackers in her kitchen and talked about the weather, about the neighbor who had bought a new lawn mower, about absolutely nothing important. Before I left, she touched my face and said, "You do not need to become a better man overnight. Just don't let this ugly thing teach you that everybody is like them." I thought about that the entire drive home. Don't let this ugly thing teach you that everybody is like them. That may have been the hardest part of healing, not letting go of Emily, not letting go of Jake, but refusing to let them become the lens through which I saw the rest of the world. 20. The worst part was never losing them months later, when the paperwork was almost done. I stood in the backyard late one afternoon with a cup of coffee in my hand, watching the last fall leaves spin across the grass. The air was cold. The neighbor across the fence was putting together a basketball hoop for his son. A dog barked somewhere at the end of the street. Everything around me was so ordinary, it almost felt brutal. And I found myself thinking about the question people always ask in some form. What was the worst part? Was it Emily betraying me? Was it Jake betraying me? Was it the fact that the two people I trusted most chose each other instead of truth? Yes, all of that was terrible, but none of it was the worst part. The worst part was that I lived inside someone else's lie for 2 full years. I laughed through dinners without knowing I was the joke. I tried to repair a marriage the other person was already quietly destroying. I opened my front door to the man who was helping take my life apart. I doubted myself in order to protect the image of people who did not deserve protecting. That was the worst part, that long stretch of time when I was no longer the main character in my own life and didn't even know it. But there is one thing I wish someone had told me much earlier. The truth, no matter how cruel, is still better than illusion. The truth didn't give me those 2 years back, didn't give me back my marriage, didn't give me back my friendship, didn't give me back the innocent version of myself who once believed all this was impossible. But the truth gave me something else. It gave me myself back. It let me stop sitting inside a burning house, telling myself maybe the smoke wasn't real. It let me hurt in the right place, instead of slowly dissolving inside confusion. It let me close the door. It let me walk away. And if you are listening to this somewhere alone, maybe in the dark, maybe with headphones on, maybe because you've suspected someone, maybe because you have already lived through betrayal, maybe because you woke up one night with that terrible feeling that something in your life has shifted out of place, then this is what I want to tell you. Do not ignore your instincts for too long just because you love someone. Do not let loyalty become the reason someone gets to make a fool out of you. And if the truth comes one day, even if it comes late, even if it comes like a blade straight through the chest, remember this: pain is not proof that you are weak. It is proof that you loved honestly, and the fact that someone chose to betray that love, that says everything about them and nothing about your worth. My name is Daniel. I lost my wife. I lost my best friend. I lost the feeling of home. I lost an entire version of myself. But I did not lose everything, because in the end, what remained was the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the only thing strong enough to pull you out of the wreckage.